Speaking of that, the labor market ends the year on a soft note, better than I thought it could have been, so I'll say that. But the jobs report was special considering it was the first time that it was on time in 3 months, but I'd say the data was, well, lackluster at best. Non-farm payrolls in December increased by only 50,000. At least it was an increase. It was short of the estimate of 76,000. The 2 prior months also saw downward revisions that totaled 76,000, so about 35,000 each month there.
Yeah, and the big one was actually October was a big revision, and then November was pretty small.
And we talked about that back in March and April, said wait till October, November hit. You're going to see some big...
When the revisions, I think, were so big in October because obviously the government was shut down, so it was hard to get all the data properly. But interesting thing now is the books are closed on 2025, so we can look at the full year, and payroll employment grew by 584,000, which equates to a monthly average of about 49,000 new jobs per month. This was less than 2024's gain of 2 million jobs, or about 168,000 per month. And I was kind of surprised by this, but it actually registered as the worst payroll growth outside of a recession since 2003.
But it's so important to remember that when you get down to a 4.5% level from employment, you're really scraping the bottom of the barrel. There's people that say, nope, I'm just not going to work. I'll collect unemployment, and when it runs out, I'm fine. You've got to realize, I think you'll probably never, I think maybe it has gone below 4% maybe once over time, but it's just like that's to try to lower the job rate now is so hard because you pretty much have full employment now. You want a job, it's there for you. Mm-hmm. So don't think that, that 50,000, that sounds terrible, that 168,000 per month, versus 24. Well, yeah, because you had more openings back then. So you got to look at the numbers. You got to understand the numbers, as I always say. While this all might sound troubling, it is important to remember that changes to government jobs had a large impact on the data. Since reaching a peak in January, government employment fell 277,000 jobs. I want to point out that's a good thing because it means the government's spending less on payrolls. That's a positive for the taxpayer. This also created a huge headwind for headline payroll growth.
I mean, very simplistically, most years government employment increases. Mm-hmm. So not only should you add maybe that 277,000 back to the 584, but maybe even a buffer of, let's call it 40 to 50,000. So, I mean, you add back in 300,000 jobs from that government anomaly. Now you're at 884,000 jobs created for the full year, which is going to be better, of course, than that 584. So that government situation was just really an outlier that I think distorted the numbers. And as we always say, a number means nothing at all unless you analyze it and have something to compare it to. And that is kind of what I'm looking at here with the government situation. Not as bad as you pointed out. Also, I do want to be clear, though, the labor market was still in a slower growth environment. Even if we do factor in the changes to the government situation, that was a slower year than obviously 2 million jobs created in 2024. But the thing that I just look at, you kind of alluded to it already, is that things probably aren't going to change this year. We are still going to be in a slowing labor market because that unemployment rate of 4.4%, it's hard to find people to work. And it's also important to remember that of those counted as unemployed, about 26% or 1.9 million people are considered long-term unemployed. And I love to point that one out as they have been jobless for 27 weeks or more. And I just got to say, I do wonder, how actively are these people looking for work? Because when you're a part of this survey, they call you and say, hey, are you looking for work? Yeah. They don't ask you, well, have you filled out resumes? Have you done 5 interviews? There's none of that. It's like, yeah, I'm looking for work. So, how accurate is that? And again, to have that amount of the population, of the unemployed population, to be long-term unemployed, I think that 4.4% is even light in terms of how healthy the market is.
And I do want to point out that a slower labor market like we're going into now with unemployment so low does not mean, a slowing economy. And also do want to point out that many times past administrations, I won't point out which ones, to increase the job market, they would do the opposite. They would actually make more government jobs for people. But in terms of areas of strength in the report, both healthcare and food services and drinking places, which I just call them bars. I don't think they call them drinking places. They did remain healthy. Healthcare employment was up 21,000 a month, and for the full year, average monthly gains of 34,000 jobs. This was down from 2024's monthly average of 56,000, but still pretty strong. I can't say that's not a bad number. That's a strong number. Food services and drinking places, again bars, saw employment grow by 27,000 jobs in the month for the full year, average gains of 12,000 a month. Again, these are all gains in these areas, which was similar to 2024 average of 11,000 jobs added per month. So again, some good places there, and you want to know where the jobs are. And I'm glad to see them in healthcare. The drinking places, as we call them, food services, those are your restaurants. I mean, people are out there spending money.
I was going to say, I don't really care about the healthcare. I think that's less indicative of the economy. I've talked about how it's kind of somewhat more government adjacent. You need those healthcare in good times and bad times.
Yeah.
I think that food and bars, that's where you're really going to see how healthy is the economy, because people aren't going to be eating out if things are bad, and always point out that number. It's good to see that, because I think that is truly indicative of the health of the consumer.
You do know we have a couple of healthcare companies in our portfolio, right?
It doesn't matter. I said in good times or bad. You should almost always have that growing population, especially considering our aging population.
Yeah.
You're going to need it. What I'm saying by that is not really indicative of the economy and the health of the consumer. Right. Because even if the economy were to slow down or decline, I bet you healthcare would still be increasing in jobs.
That's why it's in our portfolio.
The last thing to kind of point out here is retail trade was the real headwind for the month, as employment declined by 25,000 jobs. So that really kind of hurt the headline number. This could potentially be due to seasonal changes, but it was interesting to see that retail trade employment showed little net change in both 2024 and 2025. I was kind of surprised by that. And then also looking at other industries in the month of December, well, they showed little to no change. We're talking professional services, construction, manufacturing, very, very little changes there. Again, overall, I got to point out, I do believe this continues to show that we remain in a slow hire. People say no hire, no fire. I don't think that's the case. I'm going to call it a slow hire, low fire environment.
I like that.
And I don't see much evidence, again, that will change in 2026. The economy, I think, is going to be very similar to what we saw last year.
Yeah. So I think overall, good stuff. And we want to point out, because I know there's other people like, oh, that's terrible. No, you got to understand the numbers of what's going on there. So